as you wake up to the sound of wolves howling. There's no alarm clock, no warm bed, just the cold breath of a cave and the low crackle of embers from last night's fire. Outside, the world is unforgiving. Predators, hunger, frost and death. And yet, you must move, not because it's Monday, but because if you don't hunt, you starve. If you don't gather, your children go hungry. If you don't work with your tribe, you die alone, yes. Forget the Flintstones, forget the clubs and mammoths. The truth is far more raw and far more human. So what did cavemen really do all day? Let's go back in time and live a single day in the life of our Paleolithic ancestors. You don't wake up in a bed. You wake up on the hard-packed earth of a limestone cave, maybe with the soft rustle of dried grass beneath you, if you're lucky. The air is cold. Your breath fogs in the morning light. Somewhere nearby, the embers of last night's fire are still smouldering, throwing off just enough heat to keep the predators uneasy. This is how every Paleolithic morning began, not with a scroll through social media, but with a scan of the world around you. Eyes, ears and instinct all working at once. Was the fire still burning? Were there signs of animals nearby? Had anything changed in the night? Were the people you loved still breathing? If you were one of these early humans, your first task wasn't coffee, it was survival. The fire was everything. It kept the cold away. It kept the wolves away. It cooked your food and lit your world. But starting a fire from scratch was a brutal, painstaking task. So the trick was to never let it die. Paleolithic families would have guarded embers like treasure. In some groups, someone stayed awake through the night just to feed the coals with dried grass or bark, making sure that when morning came, all they had to do was blow life back into it. And if the fire had gone out, you were in trouble. You'd need flint, dry material and time, all while shivering and possibly being watched by hungry eyes from the trees. Once the fire was stoked, the group would begin to stir, not all at once, but slowly, in waves. Older members checked for fresh animal tracks. Children might huddle near the fire, while the more experienced foragers gathered their tools. There was no calendar, no schedule. But there was rhythm, a flow to the day that had been passed down through generations of unspoken memory. And it usually started with this: light, warmth, and the awareness that nothing was guaranteed. Once the fire was steady and the first light had stretched across the landscape, priorities had to be set, quickly. Unlike our mornings, which start with emails or school runs, the Paleolithic morning was a meeting of instinct and strategy. What do we need right now? What's running low? What's the weather doing? Where can we go and how far? The group would gather, maybe in a loose circle, maybe while tending to tools or stretching out sore limbs. But this wasn't idle chatter. It was a kind of unspoken briefing. Was the water source still clean? Were the food stores holding? Had the hunters seen signs of movement? Were the women noticing seasonal plants blooming? This is the moment where memory and observation collided. Those who had lived through 5 winters knew what the land was about to do. They could smell a storm, track the fading of berries, or notice when the animals had started changing migration patterns. Decisions were made not by orders, but by consensus, experience, and survival instinct. Water came first. Every single day required access to clean water, not just for drinking, but for cleaning wounds, preparing food, and sometimes even for rudimentary hygiene. Early humans didn't have plastic bottles or taps. They used animal bladders, carved wooden bowls, or tightly woven baskets sealed with pitch. Someone, often women or adolescents, would walk to a stream or spring with these containers and return, carefully balancing them. Next came tools. Was anything broken? Were spears still sharp? Did someone need a new scraper or hide puncher? There was no hardware store. If something broke, it had to be fixed with whatever you had on hand. Stones were flaked into cutting edges, bones were shaped into awls. If you were lucky, someone in your band was an expert napper, a stone tool maker who knew just how to strike a flake without shattering the whole piece. Then came food. Always food. Did you need to hunt today? Or did you still have dried meat stored from a previous kill? Had someone spotted deer or rabbit tracks nearby? Were the edible roots still in season? Were there nuts left, or had the squirrels taken them all? You didn't meal prep in the Paleolithic era. You had to earn every bite. And every morning began with the silent question, can we feed everyone today? Once the essentials were checked, fire burning, water gathered, tools ready, it was time to venture out. The moment you left the safety of your shelter, the world became a threat, but also an opportunity. Food didn't come to you. You went to it. Foraging groups set out quietly. A pair of women and children might head toward a berry patch remembered from last summer. A few skilled hunters might fan out toward an open plain, moving silently with stone-tipped spears in hand. These weren't leisurely strolls. They were tactical missions. Every step could mean danger or reward. The forest wasn't empty. Big cats, bears, wolves, venomous snakes all shared the land. You might be the hunter one moment and the hunted the next. The success of a single gathering trip could feed the group for a day or two, or end in injury or nothing at all. It was a gamble every time, and yet it wasn't chaos. These people weren't wandering aimlessly. Their mental maps were astonishing. They knew exactly where certain trees grew, which roots were edible only after soaking, which mushrooms to never, ever touch. They could track animals from a single bent twig or disturbed patch of dirt. They read the land like we read a phone screen. Those who stayed behind had work too. Someone tended the fire, watching it like a precious child. Others sorted old tools, broke stones into new blades, or prepared skins from a recent hunt. Children learned by watching, imitating, and eventually doing. Play and practice were the same thing. A game of throwing sticks. It was also spear training, mimicking a mother grinding seeds. That was a lesson in survival. Back then, the idea of free time didn't exist, but neither did boredom. Every action had purpose, every moment had stakes. This wasn't a slow-paced life, it was a life lived close to the bone, where the rising sun wasn't just a beginning, it was a reminder, you're still alive. Now earn another day. When we picture early humans hunting, we often imagine brute strength, a man with a massive club charging at a mammoth, but that cartoonish idea couldn't be further from reality. In truth, hunting in the Paleolithic world required precision, patience, coordination, and most of all, strategy. You didn't just go out and start chasing things. You tracked, you waited, you studied wind direction, you remembered where herds moved during last season's migration, and most of the time you failed. Large animals like aurochs, wild horses and reindeer were powerful, fast and dangerous. If you injured one and didn't kill it instantly, it might turn on you. That wasn't a hypothetical risk. It was a deadly reality. That's why most hunts weren't solo adventures. They were group operations. You'd have scouts, often the most experienced in the group, reading the land for subtle signs. Fresh scat, crushed grass, snapped branches. The hunters would then try to flank the prey, push it toward a natural trap, a cliff, a bog, or a narrow pass. This wasn't luck, it was tactics. It took communication without words. It took courage without glory. And the weapons? Far from primitive. Early humans created throwing spears with sharpened stone or bone tips. Later they developed atlatls, spear throwers that added speed and force. And eventually the bow and arrow changed everything. But even with these tools, success was never guaranteed. Some days you returned triumphant, dragging a carcass that would feed the entire band. Other days you came back with nothing but blisters, bruises and silence. And that was expected. Because hunting wasn't your only hope, it was just one part of a larger plan. Which brings us to the quiet powerhouse of Paleolithic survival, gathering. If hunting was the high-stakes poker game of Paleolithic life, gathering was the steady paycheck, quiet, consistent, and absolutely essential. While hunters chased uncertain wins, gatherers brought back the food that actually kept the group alive day to day. Tubers, nuts, berries, seeds, leafy greens, edible roots, insect larvae. Things that don't seem impressive to us now. But back then, they were gold. The gatherers, usually women and older children, weren't randomly picking leaves off bushes. They were ecologists in motion. They knew what plants were edible raw, which needed soaking, which ones became poisonous in the wrong season. They knew how to dig without damaging a root system so it could grow back next year. They weren't just taking, they were managing. You walked for miles sometimes, scanning the earth for the glint of ripe berries or the scratchy leaves that meant wild onion. You carried woven baskets or animal hide pouches. You didn't eat everything you found. Some things were saved for others, or for later, or to trade. And gathering wasn't without danger. You could run into snakes, wild animals, or get injured miles from camp. But you moved in small groups, and you moved with knowledge. You weren't just gathering food, you were gathering information. Where plants were thriving, how the land was shifting, what animals were nearby. This knowledge was passed down through stories, songs, repetition. A child might not know the Latin name for a plant, but they knew its colour, its smell when ripe, its taste when spoiled. This was a world where education wasn't in classrooms. It was in your footsteps, your fingertips and your stomach. And while the meat got the celebration, it was the plants, quiet, dependable, life-giving, that kept people alive through failed hunts, lean seasons and bitter winters. But not everything you ate was raw from the ground, because around that fire something revolutionary was happening: cooking. At some point in the long arc of early human life, someone tossed a root into a fire and everything changed. Cooking wasn't just about flavour, it was technology. When Paleolithic people began to apply fire to food, they unlocked calories they couldn't access before. Tough roots became soft. Meat became safer, toxins in certain plants were neutralized. It wasn't just evolution, it was innovation. But fire didn't just cook, it connected. As the sun dropped below the horizon, people gathered around the flames. This is where the day's chaos ended and the night's rituals began. Food was shared, tools were sharpened, wounds were cleaned, stories were told. The fire wasn't just heat, it was memory, it was safety, it was home, and it was surrounded by work. Someone was pounding nuts with stone, another was skinning a rabbit with a flint blade. Someone else was heating water in a carved-out bowl lined with animal hide, tossing in herbs to treat a cough or an ache. The campsite was a hub of activity, like a miniature factory and village combined. Tools were constantly being made and maintained. A stone flake dulls fast, so you need to know how to shape another. A spear breaks. You find the right branch, straighten it with fire, lash on a sharpened point. Over time, these tools became more specialized. Scrapers, awls, needles, points, grinders. Each one reflected knowledge passed down through thousands of generations. Even containers evolved, from hands and leaves to gourds and woven baskets to, eventually, pottery. Every new invention meant more survival, more flexibility, more range. And all of this, the gathering, the cooking, the crafting, happened while watching the darkness for predators, because this world didn't rest when the sun set. But around the fire, Paleolithic humans built a kind of bubble, part shelter, part school, part survival engine. And inside that bubble, something deeper was forming. Connection, community, and the very first roots of culture. Say the word caveman, and everyone pictures the same thing. A hairy human huddled in a dark cave, gnawing on a bone. But the truth? Caves were rarely home. Caves were valuable real estate, naturally insulated, protected from predators and weather, and often near water. But not every region had caves. And even where they did, not all caves were suitable for long-term living. Most were damp, cold and hard to access, and with so many people, families, tools, food, they filled up fast. You couldn't exactly Airbnb your way into one. So early humans got creative, they built. The earliest evidence of constructed shelters shows remarkable ingenuity. In open plains and river valleys, people dug post holes, set up wooden frames, and covered them with animal hides, woven mats, or even grass. Think of it like a Paleolithic yurt. At Terra Amata in France, over 300,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered remnants of oval-shaped huts, some as long as 15 meters. These weren't crude shacks, they had structure, purpose, space. In Ukraine, mammoth bones were arranged in rings, the foundation of circular dwellings covered with hides and turf. These homes weren't just protection from the cold, they were engineered responses to brutal winters, using the bones of hunted animals as architecture. Inside these shelters, space was organized with surprising care. The fire pit sat at the center. Around it, sleeping areas, food preparation zones, and places for tool making. There was order, not chaos. And it wasn't just about survival, it was about belonging. These homes were decorated. Some had ochre-painted stones, others had beads or carved figurines nearby. Even if life was short and brutal, people still carved meaning into the walls around them. Home wasn't a fixed structure. It was wherever the group could build safety. And in that safety, something powerful grew: community, memory, and the first whispers of identity. Survival wasn't some dramatic once-in-a-while ordeal, it was a daily grind. Just like your phone needs charging and your fridge needs stocking, a Paleolithic home needed constant attention. Only the stakes were higher, much higher. First, the fire. This wasn't a cozy luxury, it was the heartbeat of the camp. It kept predators away, cooked food, warmed freezing bodies, and even offered light for work or rituals. But fire was fragile. It needed feeding, shielding from wind, constant watching. Let it go out, and you didn't just get cold, you risked losing your lifeline. Starting a new fire from scratch wasn't easy, especially without matches or lighters. Some groups carried embers in special containers, nursing the flame from place to place. Next, tool care. A good blade or scraper wasn't just handed to you, it took skill and time to craft. These tools dulled with use, cracked or broke, so daily maintenance was essential. A skilled flint knapper could shape a cutting edge in minutes, but for the average person it took patience and know-how. And tools weren't one-size-fits-all. There were different scrapers for hides, points for hunting, and small blades for processing plants or meat. Then came shelter upkeep. Rain could sag your hide walls. Wind might snap a wooden frame. Constant repairs were the price of staying dry, warm and alive. Even the ground inside shelters had to be maintained. Dug out, smoothed, sometimes even lined with plant matter or furs for sleeping. Waste had to be removed. Archaeologists have found dump zones just outside of living spaces, early sanitation systems in a way. Hygiene mattered. Dirty shelters attracted pests, spoiled food and disease. And don't forget childcare. In a world without daycares, every adult was a caregiver. Babies were carried on hips or backs while work continued. Children learned by watching, imitating, helping. There was no school, but education happened non-stop. Each task was small, but miss one, and the system cracked. The Paleolithic home ran on constant collective effort. It was a full-time job, just to exist. If one thing defined early human life, more than fire, more than tools, more than food, it was their relationship with each other. Humans didn't survive the Paleolithic because they were the strongest. They survived because they were the most connected. Social bonds were survival bonds. A typical band might include 20 to 30 individuals, a few families, some elders, lots of kids. These weren't random strangers, they were kin or bonded through shared struggle and mutual trust. And in a harsh world, trust was everything. Food wasn't hoarded, it was shared. That's not idealism, it was insurance. You might succeed at hunting today. Tomorrow, someone else might have better luck. Sharing created a kind of social bank account. Give now, receive later. And if you didn't share, you risked being cut off. And in the wild, that could mean death. There was no government, no police. But there were rules, unwritten yet enforced through gossip, ridicule, or even exile. Early humans maintained peace not through power, but through pressure. You didn't want to be the one who didn't help build the shelter, or who took food but never gathered. Reciprocity was everything. Even art served a social function. Cave paintings, beads, musical instruments, these weren't just decorations, they were messages, marks of identity, proof that we exist, that we belong. A carved figurine left at a sacred site may have been a prayer or a sign of alliance with another group. And communication? It was evolving fast. Language, or at least complex vocal signaling, was already in play. You needed it to coordinate hunts, to warn of danger, to teach skills, to tell stories. Around the fire, those stories weren't just entertainment. They were memory, education, and emotional glue. Even care for the injured tells us something powerful. Some skeletons show evidence of healed trauma, broken limbs that mended over months. That means the group fed and protected them even when they couldn't contribute. Because in the Paleolithic world, survival wasn't about going it alone, it was about sticking together. At some point, a human dipped their fingers into red ochre and pressed them against a cave wall. That moment wasn't just about colour, it was about meaning. Long before cities, before temples, before books, we left symbols. Not because we had to, but because we needed to. Needed to express, to remember, to feel. The earliest cave art is over 40,000 years old. Hand stencils, animal outlines, dots arranged in mysterious patterns. These weren't random doodles, they were deliberate, thoughtful. They carried weight, spiritual, social, maybe even political. Why paint a bison deep in a dark cave where no light ever reaches naturally? Why crawl through narrow passageways just to carve a spiral on stone? Because it meant something, and that something we're still trying to understand. Some say the animals represented hunting magic, drawing the prey to gain power over it. Others suggest they were maps of memory, marking migration routes or significant kills. Still others believe they were ritual spaces, the first sanctuaries. But one thing is certain, the humans who made these marks had imagination. They had mind. They weren't just surviving. They were thinking about what it all meant. And it wasn't just visual. Around the same time, they began to create music, actual instruments. In Germany, archaeologists uncovered bone flutes dating back over 40,000 years, carefully hollowed, precisely notched, capable of playing real scales. Paired with drums made from stretched hides or hollowed logs, these instruments suggest Paleolithic humans didn't just hear rhythm, they needed it. Music, like art, was more than noise. It united people, it marked moments, it helped to process emotion, grief, celebration, fear. Around the fire, someone played, others danced, children clapped, elders hummed. The sound wasn't just for ears, it was for the soul. And that's the point. Somewhere along the way, these early humans stopped just existing and started feeling. Imagine walking into a pitch-black cave. Your torch flickers against the rock. Then suddenly, paintings emerge, wild horses galloping across the walls, mammoths frozen mid-step, and hands, so many hands, like ghosts reaching through time. Why would someone paint here, deep in total darkness, where no one would stumble upon it by accident? The answer isn't about decoration, it's about belief. Paleolithic humans didn't have temples, but they had sacred spaces, places where the everyday world blurred with something else, something deeper. The sheer effort required to create cave art, gathering pigments, carving stone tools, lighting the dark, crawling through tunnels, suggests these weren't casual acts. They were ceremonies, rituals, the birth of what we now call spirituality. Anthropologists believe that these paintings may reflect early forms of religion or shamanic practice. Some figures even appear half human, half animal, therianthropes, possibly representing spiritual transformations or mythical beings. These aren't just drawings. They're early attempts to answer life's biggest questions. Where do we go when we die? What controls the animals, the seasons, the storms? What's out there? Watching. And it wasn't just art. Paleolithic people wore jewelry, beads, shells, carved bones, often in patterns, sometimes buried with the dead. That's not survival behavior, that's symbolic behavior. Wearing a necklace of shells meant something, maybe status, maybe identity, maybe love. Burials themselves began to appear, sometimes with grave goods, tools, food or ornaments. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal was buried with flowers. Think about that. Someone took the time to decorate a grave. That's mourning, that's memory, that's meaning. In those moments, when they painted on a wall, sang around a fire, or buried their dead, early humans did something extraordinary. They began to reach beyond the visible. They started searching for what couldn't be seen, only felt. Night falls, the day's hunting is done. Bellies are full, the fire crackles low, casting shadows on the cave walls. And then someone speaks. Not just words, a story. It might be about the hunt exaggerated with drama, or about the stars imagined as animals in the sky, or about a monster that lives beyond the hills, keeping curious children close to camp. The first stories were probably simple, but they held everything: survival tips, warnings, dreams, laughter and rules. This was the moment humanity began to echo across generations, not just in DNA, but in ideas. Stories are portable memory. Unlike paintings on a wall or bones in the ground, they live in people. How else could a grandmother explain where to find edible roots in the dry season, or why the spirits of the forest should be respected? And they didn't come alone. Music played its part too. Bone flutes, whistles, rattles made from shells or animal teeth. Singing, drumming, dancing, all bound people together, syncing their movements, emotions and breath. Archaeologists have even found fire pits surrounded by concentric rings of footprints, as if they danced in rhythm, stepping into something greater than themselves, a shared beat, a shared story, a shared identity. This was culture in its infancy, and it wasn't quiet. It roared with drum beats, echoed in cave acoustics, whispered through lullabies. With music and myth, early humans created home, not just a shelter, but a feeling of belonging. And that changed everything. So, what did cavemen really do all day? They rose with the sun, kindled flames that had burned through generations. They hunted, gathered, crafted and cooked. They laughed, grieved, loved and remembered. They told stories by firelight, painted meaning onto stone and sang to the stars. And they didn't just survive the world, they began to shape it. The people we call cavemen, our Paleolithic ancestors, weren't crude, grunting caricatures. They were innovators, strategists, artists, caretakers. So the next time you strike a match, hum a tune or tell a story, you're walking in their footsteps. If this journey through deep time made you see ancient humans in a whole new light, let us know with a like and drop a comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of ancient life, from forgotten species to the strange hacks that kept humanity going. Because history isn't just what happened, it's how we became.